Hey, welcome to Pastor's Perspective, sponsored by Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. My name is Brian Perez, and it's Thursday. You know what that means. We are here for 2 hours today until 5 p.m. Pacific time to answer your questions about the Bible, the Christian faith, just about anything that's on your mind. We'd love to chat with you at 888-564-6173. That's the number you see there on the bottom of the screen if you're watching on Facebook or on YouTube, including the new Pastor's Perspective YouTube channel, 888-564-6173. You can also send us your questions on Facebook and Instagram or by filling out the form on the Pastor's Perspective page of our redesigned website, KWVE-FM. That's our flagship station in Southern California. You can fill out the form there and get your question to us, but it's not the best way to get your question to us. That remains calling us at 888-564-6173. And answering your questions today, we've got Brian Broderson, the senior pastor of Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. You hear him on the Back to Basics radio program, and he's here in the studio today to talk to you. And so is Bobby Conway. Well, Bobby's not in the studio with us, but he is with us. He's joining us via the Bobby Cam from his home studio, his man cave in Charlotte, North Carolina, where he pastors Image Church. What's going on, guys? Good to see you.
Good to see you. Good to see you guys. Bobby has come out of his, Brian and I were trying to figure out if he was reading Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek, or Latin. He was so deeply immersed in some study, we figured it must be one of the languages or something. Being the great doctor that he is.
Well, you know what? The great doctor is looking up a book that I'm interested in reading by Michael Ward called Planet Narnia.
Oh.
And I don't know if you read that yet. Have you read that, Brian?
No, but I've heard Michael Ward interviewed twice, and I loved his, Justin Briley interviewed him, and I thought to myself as I listened to the interview, like, gosh, I'd love to get this guy's book and read it, so.
Yeah, I was fascinated by, I'm reading through the Chronicles of Narnia right now, and Planet Narnia, what Ward does in this that I'm interested in is he takes Lewis's work and shows how Lewis is drawing on the 7 medieval planets, you know, because he loved kind of the medieval literature.
Yeah.
And kind of that becomes the setting for Narnia. And it seems like he may have unlocked something that many people have wondered about.
Yes.
So I'm wanting to read through Narnia to prepare for that book.
Yeah, I remember that conversation. I remember him talking about that. Vaguely.
Yeah.
I have a vague remembrance of it. Like I remember everything these days. I remember everything vaguely.
We can jog your memory, Brian, no problem.
Okay. Yeah, it's amazing what I can remember and what I can't remember. It's like today I was shocked. Somebody asked me somebody's name, and I mean, it was just bam, like lightning, just came right. And it's a person that I haven't even talked about in years and years. And if you asked me the name of the guy that I do Pastor's Perspective with, I'd probably go, what's his name? Give me a second. Brian Perez. That's him.
Such is life. Man, it's horrible.
Yeah.
All right. I remember the phone number right now, so I'll give it out just in case. Well, you probably know it.
888-564-6173.
Good job.
Man, I haven't said that number in a long time.
You haven't had to.
No, I haven't. Got you to do that.
Yes. 888-564-6173 is the number to call. Here's a question that was sent in using that online form that I was talking about that you can find on the website of our flagship station's redesigned KWVE.com. Phil sent this one in. I'm an elder, but not a pastor at my church. It's a small church with members coming and going. The current membership has a lack of faithful givers and tithers, which has caused us to be faced with our hardest financial challenge in our 34-year history. We have an offering box on a table, and we accept online giving. We're not currently passing a basket around during offering time. We just direct folks to the offering box or the online giving. Besides praying and our pastor teaching about giving, what else would you suggest we do to help our members open their hearts and be more generous? Pastor Brian, what would you say?
Well, we are, as you know, Brian, we are doing a series on generosity right now here at Calvary Chapel on Sunday mornings. And, I don't know that there's anything else that you can do. You could pass the bag. I don't know that will make a huge difference. But I think you're doing everything. And maybe the only thing I would suggest is maybe up the prayer about it, because, God has to move on people's hearts. I started off the series talking about the children of Israel. There came that point where they were making the tabernacle, and the children of Israel were, they were dedicating their jewelry and their, different things of value. They were dedicating all of that for the construction of the tabernacle. And there came a point where Moses had to say, no more. Mm-hmm. Don't give any more. We have too much. And you look at that and you think, wow, I don't know that many churches would be able to say that to their people these days. But as I looked at that, you think the people are giving based on their gratitude for their redemption from slavery. They're giving for they're thankful to God for his preservation in the wilderness. And they're also giving with the future in mind, because they believe in the work of God and the tabernacle that is being instructed that's going to carry on the work of God. So I shared that with our congregation, that's really the same reasons why we would give as well. But in the end, I think you do what you can, and then you pray, and the Lord knows. And you mentioned 34-year history, so God's kept you thus far, and I would imagine and think that if he is still with you, like, why wouldn't he be, that he will sustain you. Maybe there needs to be some adjustments made. Maybe you need to reevaluate some of your spending and things like that. But I don't think there's anything else that you can do. Bobby, you're kind of, you guys, you're a couple years into a church plant. How are you navigating that? How are things going in regard to the finances and all that?
Well, honestly, to be fully transparent, we're super blessed, and I'm incredibly thankful for that. So, we're a smaller church right now. You might see on a good Sunday, 130, 140 people. Mm-hmm. But that's great for a church that started in the midst of COVID. Yeah. And we're financially independent. Mm-hmm. And, I've tried to be very frugal, even with the funds. So we've been able to save up close to $150,000, which means we've got almost 6 months of reserved in place. And we try to communicate that we're careful as stewards, because that, hopefully imbibes trust in the people. They want to know that the money's being handled well. And so in the first couple of years of a church plant, for example, like just this month, we're starting our retirement package. For the first couple of years of a church plant, you kind of have to forgo that. You don't have that. And now we're able to create something like that. We have a long ways to go. I mean, if we're going to get our own facilities and stuff, that's just going to be a lot. But some things, as I would say to giving, is that aspect. Number one, make sure that there's a presentation every so often, even if it's just a monthly, hey, look, here's how much is coming in, here's how much is going out, here's how much is in the bank. That just creates trust. I'd say a lack of trust thing could be a reason why people don't give. A lack of vision can be a reason that people don't give, like people don't believe in the vision. So I would say, if your pastor loves to teach, but he's not a visionary, he's going to have to find a way to cast vision for mission. So people don't get excited about giving just to give. They get excited about giving to vision and mission. So stressing that. So is it a trust issue? Is it a lack of vision issue? You can leverage stories of the joys of giving. We've done that on Sunday mornings before, where you just bring people up and they're sharing stories about what it's like. If you're preaching through books, when you come across giving, don't skip it. You might want to have like a once a month kind of just a 5-minute giving moment where you're not guilting people, but you're just letting them know what can be exciting about giving. I think another thing that we want to do is realize that people are in debt. So sometimes you can help people to get debt free. So they're struggling to give because they've got a lot of debt tied. As you said, Brian, praying about it, but just discipleship. I think that sometimes pastors shy away from it. I hate talking about giving. I rarely do it. I find myself apologizing when I'm doing it because I don't want to seem like that guy. But then I just try to say, hey, but my wife and I, we are trying to lead out of example and give as well. So those would be some practical things that I'd share.
Yeah, I think we who are Calvary Chapel people, we have a heightened sensitivity to this type of thing in regard to the negative aspect of it. So we had, I think, an aversion to even talking about it and would avoid it at all cost unless we were absolutely forced to, because the text, necessitated that we speak on it. But I realized, Bobby, that, in taking that kind of a position, we're actually failing to teach people what true discipleship is. And we're being, I think, negligent as pastors and teachers when it comes to that. So as we came to this series that we're doing right now, this generosity series, I just felt like, we're going to talk about this unashamedly because it's part of being a Christian. Giving is part of discipleship. It's just, Jesus gave. That's what he did. He came and he gave everything. And disciples are people who are like Jesus, so we are to also give. So we've been talking about it not in a guilt type of a way, because we never want to manipulate anybody or guilt anybody into giving, but just letting people be able to recognize that, hey, this is part of my Christian life and commitment and service to the Lord. It's to give. And like you were saying, I'm going to finish up the series here week after next, but I really want to talk about Haggai chapter 2, where the Lord talks to the people about the fact that, you put your money in a bag with holes in it. You're kind of doing all these things for yourself, and you're never getting ahead. And at the same time, you're neglecting the work of God. And the Lord's challenging them to put the work of God as a priority, and implying that if they do that, they themselves will benefit from it. They themselves will prosper. And I think that's a real thing. It's not just made up by the televangelists. They've taken it to kind of an extreme that obviously we never want to go to, but it is a real thing in Scripture that if we sow sparingly, in other words, if we're stingy in our giving, we're going to reap sparingly. But if we sow bountifully, we will reap bountifully. So,
yeah, I will say that I remember, speaking of the whole guilt thing, a pastor that I was under when I was in Bible college, he got up and he was preaching about giving. And he said, some of you are driving around in stolen cars, and you're going out on the weekends in stolen boats, and you're living in a stolen house because you don't give. You might as well go out, get a can of paint, get a paintbrush, and paint on your car. I stole this from God. And paint on your boat. I stole this from God. And paint on your house. I stole this from God.
Oh my goodness.
Because you purchased that with God's tithes because you've never figured out how to give.
Wow.
Can you imagine?
How well did that go over?
I didn't look to see what the giving was the next week, but man, I'll tell you what, I never forgot that word picture. And he had like his ways, man. He'd take 10 pieces of Wonder Bread and he would say, look at this. Here's 10 pieces of Wonder Bread. and God hands you 9 pieces and he says, just give me a piece back. And some of you can't even do that. Just like, oh,
That's great.
and you see this high stack of Wonder Bread in this little dinky slither that God wants back, but we eat that too.
Wow, this guy had perfected the art of guilt tripping.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, and I think that is exactly what we don't want to do. Because we don't,
Right.
I mean, we're not to give out of guilt. I mean, the scripture says that. Not to give begrudgingly or out of necessity, but to give cheerfully, joyfully.
So what does that mean to cheerfully give? I mean, like when the offering basket does come around, if the bag comes around, you just kind of laugh when you throw it in there.
Your face. Yeah.
I mean, that's just kind of...
That's it. Yeah, that's what we're teaching.
Great.
Yeah. Actually, the ushers, as they pass the bag around, they're just cracking up the whole time they're going, getting everybody all laughing. No.
Right.
Like a laughing revival.
It doesn't mean that. It means to give it with a heart of, I'm glad to give this.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it means. I'm happy to give it.
Phil, thanks for sending in your question online. And now we're going to go to the phones. 888-564-6173 is our number. 888-564-6173. Let's begin with Daniel in California. What's going on, Daniel?
Hey, guys. How's it going? Thanks for taking my call.
You bet.
I just had a quick question for you. I'm in the Old Testament right now, and, I'm at the part where God's giving the law, and he tells Moses to let the Israelites know not to murder. But then, later on in the chapters, and I believe many times over, he, instructs them to go into the land and destroy or murder the enemies. And I'm just kind of confused as to why he's telling them not to murder, but then instructing them to go in and murder.
All right. Bobby, what do you say?
I would distinguish, Daniel, between murder and killing. So when we murder somebody, obviously that is to break, a command. That's very serious. But when you think about our soldiers, for example, when they're at war, when they put their head down at night, I don't think they should put their head down at night as ones who are guilty of murder. Now, they may have killed, but that doesn't mean that they are.
Uh-oh. He froze. Brian, finish his thought.
It doesn't mean that they are murderers. And that's exactly
here I
right.
come.
Yeah.
Again.
I
All right.
I filled in a little bit of a blank, so keep going.
Yes, thank you. So how about this? Everybody who murders somebody has also killed somebody, but not everybody who has killed somebody has necessarily murdered somebody. And so when the Bible is talking about killing, you're talking about battles that are going to go on where you're pushing people out of the land. And that looks a lot different than Cain just killing his brother Abel.
Any thoughts, Brian?
Daniel, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that clears it up pretty well. I was just a little bit back and forth in between. I appreciate that, man.
Yeah, great. Okay.
You bet, bro.
Thank you for calling us today. 888-564-6173 is the number. It's 2-hour Thursday, so you can call us anytime between now and 5 p.m. 888-564-6173. Let's go to Dave in California. How can we help you, Dave?
Hello.
Hi, go ahead.
Can you hear me? Hey. First of all, I want to thank you guys for your ministry. I think it's great. I've been listening to this program for many years, even when Bible Answer Man was still doing this. Anyways, my question is this. I noticed that in the Calvary Chapel, there's a tendency from the head pastor to pass the responsibility of the church to, the son versus passing it to, one of the senior associate pastors. For example, I heard Brian Borgeson saying his son was going to take over when he steps aside. So why is that?
Let's ask Brian.
Well, let's think about that. This gets thrown around a lot, nepotism. And there is such a thing as nepotism, certainly. And it happens in all kinds of arenas,
I'm on the radio.
not only in the church. But it does at times happen in the church. But, we have a biblical kind of a precedent for things being passed on to sons. Of course, the blessing of God was passed from Abraham to his son Isaac, and from his son Isaac to his son Jacob, and then from Jacob to his son Judah. And then, of course, David became the king and the one who was the recipient of the Abrahamic covenant, the promise. And then those things were passed on through David's sons. They became the rulers after him. But it wasn't the case in every situation. Moses, of course, passed the leadership of Israel on to Joshua, but he didn't really pass it on to Joshua. God appointed Joshua. And I think that's really the key. The key is no one should be appointed to leadership, or nor should leadership automatically pass to somebody just because they are a son, but they have to be qualified, and they have to be a person that God has chosen and raised up, and their life and their fruit and all of those things will testify to that. So I received the leadership of this church. My father-in-law was the pastor of this church, but he didn't pass the church on to me. It wasn't his decision. It was a decision of the board of Calvary Chapel. So he brought me on to assist him, and when he passed away, the board made the decision for me to be the pastor. And as I'm working to transition with my son, the board, before we went anywhere with any kind of a conversation about it, the board of the church basically agreed that this was the direction the Lord was leading us. So I think that what it comes down to is you want the person that God wants, and sometimes it might be your son. I know other guys who have passed their churches on and didn't have a son to pass it on to, and have passed it on to other ministry colleagues and so forth. So,
Bobby?
Yeah. When I started the last church, I had a group of leaders, and they served with me, and they were so sensitive to this issue. And it was challenging at times because you would feel like any maneuver to leverage a family member could have, the worry of nepotism. I think that nepotism really comes into play when you give somebody in your family a job that they're not qualified for. And that becomes very apparent. But when somebody's qualified for the role and your family and God's in it, then that can be a beautiful thing. In fact, right now, my wife serves as a women's pastor. My son is a pastoral intern. And, it's crazy, but when you're family, you have each other's back. And I can just sense the extra unity that we're experiencing right now. We've raised up other people. I have Pastor Tim, Pastor Paxton, Pastor Frank. So we've got, broad leadership. But at the same token, I look at my son, for example. I don't know what the future holds, but if I had to say who will be the most qualified person to be my successor, if it was in the next 5 years, I would see that my son would be the person I'd set my attention on. He's a gifted communicator. He's crazy smart. He's got a great personality with people. He knows what it's like to have been pained. He grew up in the ministry. He sits in staff meetings like a shadow on the wall, watching what happens all the time. I disciple him. So I think that if, it's obvious to the flock in the case like Char, for example. I mean, Char didn't just come in and get the position out of nowhere. I mean, Char was already a pastor in Northern California for many years. You brought him in. You're slowly handing the ranks off. It is what it is. And for you as a father, well, what a joy that's got to be for you as a dad in the situation where you have a qualified son for the role. Hey, that's a beautiful thing, and that shouldn't be begrudged by anybody. We should just make sure that the person is qualified and called.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Dave, is that?
I agree. Yeah, I agree with everything you said. But however, there is, a lot of associate pastors that are, extremely qualified, and it's possible that they will go with, call it a flock mentality. So, there's no repercussion. Yeah, I know the person's a senior pastor, but, we're still human beings, and that tendency to maybe get back at one of the associate pastors or one of the board members for not going with what I truly want. I mean, it happens not just in the churches, but also happens in the corporate world and places like, those type of scenarios. But I agree with everything you said. I just want to get a, little understanding and making sure, I'm not stepping out of bounds. I'm not trying to cause any problems. It's just a question that I have.
Oh, it's a good question, Dave. It's a legitimate question. So we're happy to answer it.
Yep. If not, we wouldn't have taken your call.
Yeah. And like you said, Bobby, I mean, really the big questions are qualification and calling, and I have 4 children. So, my children all work independently. They're not employed by the church. And the only one that is my son, who came and joined our staff 2.5 years ago after being 15 years pastoring his own church in the Bay Area of California here. So, yeah, so I'm not concerned about nepotism. I think I'm wise enough to know that you would never, ever, ever want to pass a church on to somebody that God hadn't called to lead it, because that would be a disaster for everybody included, especially the person that was trying to lead it and wasn't called to lead it. Over the years, there were people that would challenge me and ask me, and, people accuse me of, I'm only here as the pastor of the church because Chuck is my father-in-law. And I said, well, let me tell you, I'm not that stupid. If that was the reason I was here, I would quit right now. I would leave because nobody wants to be in a position like this for those reasons. You want to be in a position like this because you know that God put you there. Because there's plenty of stuff to, make you want to walk away. But if you know God's put you there, you don't walk away.
Bobby?
Yeah. So if I could just change gears, with a heart full of gratitude. For about 4.5 years now, I've had the privilege of being brought on the show. I haven't been full time for that long, but about 3 years. But I just want to say thank you, Pastor Brian, for the opportunity to do this show with you. I know that it's a tremendous privilege, and I feel like I want to just tell the audience how much I appreciate them being willing to listen and call up. It's such a privilege to be your teammate and to come alongside of you. And I pinch myself that I get to do a program when I think of my life and studying answers to questions and listening to every man an answer back in seminary, and you were doing it with Chuck, and I'd be listening on the radio on the way to Dallas Seminary and back, and then listen to Bible Answer Man. And then the way that this has come about, I just want to express, I really do appreciate this, and I'm very thankful for the opportunity that you've given me.
So did you say 4.5 years? That's how long it's been?
It was 4.5 years ago that I went off to Calvary Chapel and I taught at the Bible College, and then Pastor Brian started bringing me over, and I came on with him a few times, or like Don Stewart a couple times. And then after my semester, Brian brought me out of my long tenure as a Bible teacher at the Bible College after teaching one semester, and he brought me on to be his teammate at Pastor's Perspective.
Very cool.
Yeah, and I'm very thankful because somebody was talking to me. I mentioned the other day, that people are starting to ask me like, "Oh, are you still on the Pastor's Perspective program?" And yes, I am, but I travel. But then somebody was talking to me about it, and I said, well, Bobby's actually really the anchor in so many ways, because he's the one who's really here faithfully, consistently every day, along with your none other than Brian Perez. But I'm right. I'm very thankful for this great team that God has brought together, and I talked to some people last night at the Wednesday, the summer lectures, and they're saying, "Oh, we can't wait for the Pastor's Perspective live." So
yes, July 12th.
That'll be great.
Yeah,
Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. It's going to be fun. We hope to see you there. All right, we're going to take a break, and then we'll be back with more of your questions. We're here till 5 p.m. Pacific time today, so grab a line, 888-564-6173. We're back on Pastor's Perspective. Thanks so much for joining us on the radio and on Facebook and YouTube, or maybe you're listening not live, but on a podcast. Thank you so much. We're here Monday through Friday from 3 to 4 p.m. Pacific time to answer your questions. I should say Tuesday through Friday because we're not here on Mondays, but on Thursdays we make up for it by sticking around till 5. And then we get the audio from that second hour and we play it back the following Monday. So today is Thursday. We're going to be here until 5 o'clock. We hope to hear from you at 888-564-6173. Brian Broderson and Bobby Conway answering your questions, 888-564-6173. Here's one that was sent in on Facebook, and this one wants to know about a video that he recently saw online. And in this video, the speaker is saying that some of the New Testament is directed towards Jews, and that as Gentiles, other parts of the body are directed towards us. So we shouldn't be throwing verses that are directed towards Christians, towards Jews, and vice versa, because some of these verses don't apply to us, they apply to the nation Israel. So, Brian, what would you say about that kind of thing?
Yes, that is the way you properly read the Bible. You apply what is said to who it is being said. And yes, there are certain things in the New Testament. The book of Hebrews, for example, is written to Hebrews. But it obviously also has a lot of overlap to non-Hebrew Christians as well, because it's talking about Christian doctrine. There are places when Paul is talking very specifically about the law. So he's obviously talking to Jews because they are the ones who are under the law or have been under the law and know the law. And so we just need to understand that in its context. I don't think it's as complicated as our questioner is making it sound like. I think there's parts where you read it and you say, okay, yeah. That this is obviously Paul is talking to Jewish believers here, but he moves on quickly from that and he's talking to everybody. And even when he's talking to Jewish believers, there can be some application to us as well. So I don't know. What do you think, Bobby?
I think that you're exactly right. I mean, take the book of Galatians, for example. You have the Judaizers, which is a zealous Jewish group that is intermixed with the Galatian believers, and they're trying to tell them that they need to be circumcised in order to experience their salvation. And Paul backs the Judaizers off. And so we have to remember that each of these letters, the 13 letters that Paul wrote, for example, these are letters written to a particular context. And so if you are the author of Hebrews, some say Paul, some say Barnabas, others aren't sure. But if you take the letter to the Hebrews, like you said, Brian, this is a Jewish audience that is being addressed. And so that's nothing problematic for us. I mean, if you're sitting down and you're going to pen a letter and it's going to go to somebody or a group, well, what's the makeup of that group? Well, that group could be Jewish. That group could be Gentile. That group could be a combination of people. And then when it comes to application, I would say that in many ways, the applications that would apply to the Jew also apply to the Gentile, because the Jew is no longer under the old covenant. And so they, like the Gentile, also are free from some of the laws that were once in effect as it relates to the old covenant. So I think that there are applications. We just have to be careful when we're reading the Bible that we ask, what is the audience? What's the issue? And how does the issue apply in today's context? And we seek to draw what's known as a timeless application bridge from the ancient culture to today's world.
All right. Thanks for sending in your question on Facebook. Let's go to the phones now. 888-564-6173. Tammy, welcome to the program.
Hi.
Hello.
Hey, we've been studying Chronicles at church and reading about Solomon building the temple and so forth. And we seem to hear God's voice like out loud, like audibly, like you and I are talking right now. And so I'm just wondering if that is true, like he heard God's voice like out loud, like a real conversation. And also, does that happen nowadays?
What do you say, Brian?
What's the example that you're giving of it? You said you're reading Chronicles or studying Chronicles.
Solomon, it's like Solomon is having a conversation with God, you know.
Right, okay, yeah.
And it seems like a real conversation, like you and I are talking, you know, back and forth, they could hear each other.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting, though, when you look a little more closely at the details, you realize that this is a dream. Solomon is having a dream. And in the dream, the Lord is speaking to him. And it's obviously the Lord is actually speaking to him in a dream, because everything that is communicated becomes a reality out, as Solomon wakes up and goes on with life. So if you ask, can God speak to you audibly? Yes, of course he could. And does God speak audibly? I think he does on occasion to some people. I've talked to people who have said that they heard an audible voice that they believed was the Lord, and they acted on what they heard, and it seemed that it was the Lord. I can't say that I've ever heard an audible voice, but I've heard something very close to an audible voice where, to me, when God speaks to you, it's even more than an audible voice. It sort of resonates within your entire being. It's like a voice that speaks to you in the very core of your being, and you know that God is speaking to you. But, of course, we always want to remember that the Bible is the place that we want to look for the voice of the Lord first and foremost. But there are places where people have never read the Bible. They've never had access to the Bible. We hear all the time about Muslim people who are coming to faith in Jesus, but their first encounter with Jesus is either through a dream or through a voice or something like that that's happening. So,
All right. Hope that helps you, Tammy. Thank you for calling us today here on Pastor's Perspective. 888-564-6173 is our number. And now we're going to go to Wisconsin. And here is Ezekiel. Hello, Ezekiel.
Hello, Pastor.
Hi,
Good to hear you all.
Hello.
Hey, Pastor Brian, Dr. Bobby. It's a pleasure hearing you all today.
Hello, Ezekiel.
So my question
Good, thank
is,
you.
by the way, I was reading just comment on Facebook last week on the Pastor's Perspective page, and someone wrote under and said, Christianity doesn't pay. I have walked away for 10 years now, and nothing is going wrong. Feel free to walk away. And that just triggered my heart because I have a cousin who has been walking with the Lord for a long time, but walked away, and now is in living like a devil, I'll put it that way. And so I guess my question is, what lies ahead of someone who's been saved for a very long time, but then turns their back on God?
So that's your question. How does God deal with someone who walks away from the faith after following him for a very long time? That's what we see here on the screen. Bobby, what do you say to Ezekiel?
It's really hard to say. I mean, because there are times where it looks as if when we're reading the Bible that God's tolerance doesn't seem to be on a long leash. At other times, it feels like it is. And there isn't always a real rhyme or reason for understanding the timing of God's justice. I think what we have to rest in is that he's going to ultimately be just, but whether or not he steps in and intervenes, sometimes, it looks as if somebody, is just getting away with whatever they want to get away with, and God's not concerned. Well, God's always concerned, but we can't really understand or interpret why he intervenes when he does or when he doesn't. And so I think the big thing is we can just pray for that person to return. Many people who walk away don't return. Paul talks about, turning them over to Satan, and you think, wow, what in the world? That just seems crazy. Well, what does that mean? Well, just basically, let the evil one and the world's ways have full impact on this person to bring them to their senses so that they will return. So in some ways, you can pray for that. You want consequences to take place. Sometimes you get into this discussion about imprecatory prayers, for example, and some people will say, we're not to pray that way in the New Testament. And I think, well, look at the book of Revelation, man. When you got the souls up under the altar, man, that's an imprecatory prayer, praying for God's judgment to fall on the nations. I don't think that that's necessarily the style we want, but if you got somebody just living in an utter rebellious state, then a way to pray would be, God, I pray that the consequences will catch up with the decisions that they're making so that they can realize that walking with you is a true blessing. But that's really all I could say to that. There's no way I could know why or why not he is holding off on intervening.
Does this help you, Ezekiel?
Yes, sir, it does help me. But one other question is, what is their end at the end of the day if they die in that state? Like, how would they face eternity? Heaven, hell, dying as a rebellious Christian?
What do you think, Brian?
Well, I think the question really is, are they a Christian? And I think you can be a Christian and be rebellious, and you could die in a rebellious state. You're still a Christian, and you go to be with the Lord. You have a less than abundant entry into the kingdom. There's shame, I think, at that point. But again, the question is the person really a Christian? Christians are people who follow Jesus, and although they might have lapses in their faith, they do not, in kind of the sense that I think you're describing, have just a complete rejection, departure, and never, I'm done with Jesus. I wouldn't say to a person like that or about a person like that, like, hey, don't worry about it. They're in heaven. One of the indicators that we are in Jesus is that we remain in Jesus. So if we don't remain, then there's a big, big question mark as to whether there's really a relationship that's there.
Ezekiel, thanks for calling us from Wisconsin today on Pastor's Perspective. And now we're coming back to California with a question on righteous anger. Matt, welcome to the program.
Hi.
Hello.
Good afternoon, gents.
How's it going?
Hey, Matt.
Hi there.
It's going good, Brian. I'm actually a member of Brian Broderson's congregation in Costa Mesa.
Great.
Been there a long time.
Good.
So my question actually kind of involves some things that have been discussed in the last couple days. One of them was, just to lay a little context, what Brian did a show here on K-Wave about the darkness that's growing and how scientists can't even define what a man and a woman is. And Bobby Conway has frequently referenced the CDC stat of kids, 1 in 4 kids now, struggling with their sexual identity or whatever. And then it was yesterday I was listening. We were talking about how we're supposed to always be walking in love, and our ultimate goal should be bringing other people to Christ. But how do we not feel anger when we see these things going on where they're literally attacking our kids with indoctrination and sexualization, because it's a lot of these things that are leading to that stat that Bobby references. And it's like, how do you, as a Christian, not feel anger? And I don't mean walking around being angry all the time, but when you see these things, how do you not feel anger? Is there not a provision for righteous anger? And that question could go to either Bobby or Brian.
Okay, we'll start with Bobby. What would you say to Matt, Bobby?
Matt, I feel angry all the time about what's happening in this moral revolution. I'd like to think it's righteous anger. I suppose we all would, and it's hard to know when that line is crossed. But I'm very frustrated about, drag queens giving lap dances to kids during story hour. And I'm mind-boggled by how many parents are okay with this kind of behavior. It's just mind-boggling to me. So I would say there's something wrong if we don't feel a sense of righteous anger. The key is to not allow our righteous anger to mess up our witness as it relates to the Great Commission. So we feel righteous anger about the sin we see in the world, but we can't forget that there is a cure for it, and that's the cross and the atonement. And we got to go out with that gospel unconditional love. And so if we have righteous anger, I think we're better off dealing with that in-house and with God in prayer and with our other brothers and sisters, but not letting that leak out on those we're trying to reach for Christ. We want them to sense our unconditional love and grace and mercy. If somebody was to ask me that's a non-believer, maybe part of the LGBTQ agenda, does it anger me? I would have to say, honestly, yeah, it does. It really frustrates me, but it's not that I'm angry at any individual. I'm angry at what the movement as a whole is doing to our family, what it's doing to the confusion of our kids, what it's doing to the values that we have, how we've lost a sense of rationality, how we're, strong-arming people into believing what's happening. That's the kind of stuff that really is bothersome. So I will say, I'm not typically your boycott guy. I've said that before on the radio. But I will say, in particular, I'm thankful that a lot of these moms in particular are saying enough's enough. I want to go into Target and I don't need to be met with tuck suits for my kids to see. And I think we're spending so much money, time, and attention on something that is such a small issue. Like, you would think that in other words, you realize, we're not as bad off as you would think if the biggest thing that we're talking about in our culture is tuck suits. That's not a good thing, the tuck suit. I'm not saying that, but what I'm saying is we have all this time on our hand where we could just sit around and talk about pronouns. And there's got to be a way to talk about this issue where we're not forcing this down each other's throats. And that's what bugs me. I am bothered by the fact that I feel love shame sometimes, that I just can't disagree with somebody without somebody saying that I'm a bigot. I think that I could love somebody and have a different opinion about it. So the conclusion is, if we don't feel any anger, then maybe we're kind of anesthetized to what's going on. But if we're taking our anger and becoming, people who are going out and yelling at the culture, then we're taking it too far.
Brian, what would you add?
Well, I would disagree with everything Bobby said. And I think you have to be repulsed, revolted. The drag queen thing is just, it's such a, and I'm the same way. I think you could shut the drag queen thing down tomorrow if the parents just woke up and realized the insanity of what parent wants their kid to be subjected to that, And then, of course, back in your neck of the woods, Bobby, they did was it there or where was it that they put some restriction on the drag queen things and some legislation, so one of the states, I think it was somewhere back where you are. And people were all upset about it. People, a handful of people that have a megaphone, but it wasn't to stop drag queen shows. It was to prevent them taking place with children present. Mm-hmm. Whatever happened to movie ratings where you can't even go in to watch a movie if you're, under 13, but you can go to a drag queen show? What?
When you're 5.
Yeah. I mean, what planet are these people coming from? So, you can tell that this stuff annoys me as well. But I do think that there's a place. I think there's a place to push back. I think there's a place to talk about the sinfulness and the absurdity of all of this kind of stuff. But I do think, too, we are called to speak the truth in love. So somehow we have to strike that balance. And I do think James tells us that the wrath of man does not produce the righteousness of God. So we have to recognize me getting angry about everything isn't going to solve the problem. I need to have a level head, and that's where we pray. That's where we trust the Lord. But it's not unloving to speak the truth. I mean, we are called to speak the truth, and sometimes people are going to feel like you don't love them because you speak the truth. And in some senses, that has to do with the way you speak it. But if you're speaking the truth in love and the truth is offending, then that is just the way it goes. Paul, the apostle, recognized that happens. He said to the Galatians, "Have I become your enemy because I tell you the truth?" Sometimes the truth is the very thing that sends people into an orbit of anger. And we have to make sure that on our side, we're doing it. We truly are speaking the truth in love. But the truth is going to offend. And so let it offend where it's going to offend.
Bobby?
Yeah, I mean, we do whatever we can, like you're saying, to speak the truth in love, Brian. I do think that when we feel this situation, this tension, some of the things that have happened is our younger Gen Zs, they are a very empathetic culture. So they're high on empathy. But one of the dangers of being high on empathy is you can be low on speaking the truth. Mm-hmm. So you focus so much on trying to empathize with people that you become blind to the fact that there's something off. And I think that is very dangerous. We need to be empathetic for sure. I'm all for validating people's confusion and their angst that they feel for maybe the sexual confusion going on. But to validate that is, hey, just live that out. That's okay. In other words, we're living in some scary times because again, I've said this before, but what are you going to do with the bisexual? I mean, can't you hear the arguments coming? We have a prejudiced society toward monogamous love. This isn't fair. I should be able to express my sexuality fully in the context of marriage. And I can't do that if you limit my sexual affections to a man or a woman, because I am pansexual and I'm drawn to both male and female, and I need one of each in order to feel fulfilled in this. I mean, why is it? Why do we tell the person that feels like a woman in a man's body that their observation is correct, that they really are a woman, they just have a man's body? Well, then why is it then when the pedophilia person, they're struggling with pedophilia, we can say, no, your feelings are wrong toward children. So in other words, we have these boundaries that we come up against, but I fear that we're so lifting objective morality out of the way that we're not going to be able to have a ground to stand on in the future to make these moral arguments against pedophilia, bestiality, and polygamy. And I think that we can see where this is headed.
Mm-hmm. I think too that I think we need to make a big distinction between like gender dysphoria and drag queens. I think there's a big difference there.
I do too.
And I think we can't lose that. Drag queens, these are men. These are grown men who want to behave sexually around children. This is a problem. Mm-hmm. This is like you're talking about pedophilia. Well, as far as we know, that's still illegal, right? You go to jail if you molest children or whatever. So in what world is it a right, any kind of a right, that you have grown men sexualizing little children?
And we act like this is cute, seeing a 6'5" man show up in high heels and a dress, and offer a lap dance to our kids. That's not cute.
No,
that's not heroic. And we're lifting these people up like they're like our heroes. Yeah. And we've got to really figure out what is a hero again in our culture. Yeah. I mean, literally, you would think that the greatest heroes to ever walk on planet Earth is anybody that comes out LGBTQ. Yeah. And listen, that I appreciate if somebody's experiencing gender dysphoria and they're confused and they need to talk. And I can imagine it is courageous for somebody to share, hey, I'm struggling, Mom and Dad, with this. Can you help me? I'm not trying to minimize that. But to just say that that's a ticket into being a hero, listen, our sexual attractions shouldn't be something that makes us a hero or not. Mm-hmm. Just, you could be attracted to kids, you could be attracted to men, you could be attracted to women. What we're attracted to in life shouldn't be the substance of how we define a hero. Mm-hmm. But our greatest heroes today, as held up by much of the media, is the LGBTQ community. Now, that's not to say that there aren't some lovely people within the LGBTQ community, but that agenda is not something that we turn heroes into.
Matt, thank you for your phone call today on Pastor's Perspective. And that reminds me, this weekend on Bobby's Christianity Still Makes Sense radio program, heard on our flagship station K-Wave and our sister station KSDW, Bobby is airing the episode How I Changed My Views regarding the LGBTQ plus community. You can also see that video on Bobby's Christianity Still Makes Sense YouTube channel if you can't listen on the radio this weekend. All right, if you're on hold, stay on hold. We're going to do another hour of the program in just a little bit here on Pastor's Perspective, sponsored by Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa.